Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year. I hope everybody's doing well this afternoon. Today we have session number 5. It's going to be Introduction to Hardening. And the general idea here is that last week, what we ended up doing is we took a look at our different ways that we can set up some firewall configurations. And that's certainly a great step in computer security. You can limit your attack surface. So if someone is, let's say, running an Nmap scan, it will only return back the open listening ports that you want to allow to be shown as listening. So for instance, if you're running a website, you can only show that, for instance, port 80 and port 444 are listening on the machine, and nothing else appears to be active to that attacker. Unfortunately, the downside is that there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of work around that. So for instance, if there is a application level vulnerability in that website, they may still be able to gain access to your machine, and they may be able to do some nefarious attacks when they get on there. So it's not necessarily always going to be the end all be all solution, but at least, especially from a very basic level, it's a good first step. And in something like a competition setting, which is sort of what some of this boot camp was designed for, it's a great way to give yourself more time to then go ahead and do more stuff, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be looking at how do we further secure the machine? Are there different areas that we might want to pay special attention to on there as well? So there's different stuff that we can do from that point of view. So that's the main objective for today. At least in terms of kind of where we're at in the overall seminar. I'll keep doing this whenever we're starting up, but at the very least, we only have 2 more left. So thanks for making it this far if you're watching at home or you're joining us with our Zoom sessions here. But so far we've done quite a bit. We took a look at the alerting environment that we're using here, along with the command line. We set up some basic static IP addresses within that internal network for an Ubuntu, a CentOS, and a Debian machine, and of course with our internal Kali machine as well. Last week, we talked about different red team perspectives, so different ways in which a red teamer might be attempting to gain access to your machine. And then on Thursday last week, we took a look at different firewalls. Today and on Thursday, we're going to be kind of wrapping things up here. So we're going to take a look at how do we, after we've set up our initial defenses with those firewalls, how do we then go ahead and further secure things, especially in like a competition setting. They do all sorts of fun stuff. So they may set up a task that will give them a shell, or they may do some other fun stuff where when they get inside, it's going to be a lot easier for them to do a lot more damage. So we're going to be taking a look at a few things there today. And then on Thursday, we're going to be doing some incident response. So we're going to take a look at different techniques and tools that we might be able to use to then identify an attacker when they've gained access, or maybe they have, so for instance, in the Collegiate Cyber Defense program, there was a vulnerable PHP application, and we were able to view what commands they ran through that vulnerable PHP page. So that's just a sample of kind of what we're going to be looking at today and on Thursday. Generally speaking, when we take a look at hardening, I kind of wanted to give an outline of sort of kind of what are some of the objectives that we're going to be trying to do here. So the first thing that I would always recommend is you want to take an inventory of your core features and functions. So if you work at a business or you're out in the field, it's very important, at least within your security team, to have a good understanding of what is it that we need to secure? What is the normal operation supposed to look like? What users are authorized on each of the different machines? What softwares are authorized, and then what ports are supposed to be listening. So you want to have a good understanding of what that looks like. Nowadays, as things start to kind of grow into the cloud dimension, or you have a whole bunch of different API stuff, you want to take a look at, in that case, are what kind of security tokens are you using? Who has access to those security tokens? For your APIs, how many APIs do you have? Are you doing certain security checks on those? So that's extremely important. We'll take a look at a little bit of kind of what I would recommend, at least in terms of the inventory. We will then identify known vulnerabilities. So it kind of depends. If you have, if you're out in the field versus if you're in a competition setting, you'll have different time constraints and when you're able to do that. So from a business point of view, you could potentially contract out or conduct your own penetration test within your environment to get a good idea in terms of, okay, what's vulnerable? What can we do to then go ahead and secure that? Are you actually able to execute those attacks against those services and configurations. Whereas in something like a competition setting, you have a very limited amount of time. So you may not be able to do something like that. But we'll talk a little bit about, okay, if you're given access to stuff ahead of time, what are your options from? We'll then look at some different misconfigurations. So when we look at a difference between something that could be like an application level or something that's actually on the machine there, when we actually get down to the machine, most of it is going to be some form of misconfiguration. So let's say that you're trying to get some business tax done, and everybody's done this. I've certainly done this. But when you're trying to get something done, sometimes you make a change on the permissions real quick. So you're like, okay, well, maybe I'll run this as root, or maybe I will just change the permissions so that everybody can run it or everybody can write to it just to make my life easier. And so a lot of the times that can then lead to these vulnerabilities, different things that you can then execute to then gain yourself higher level privileges. Then you'll want to, of course, mitigate those findings. So you want to go through, if maybe you did some sort of vulnerability report. So let's say that you use an automated tool like Nessus or OpenVAS, and you got a whole bunch of information back. You're going to go ahead and take those findings, and you're then going to apply them. So you're going to say, okay, maybe all I need to do is update this given software. Or maybe I just need to change permissions on something. So that's what you're going to do there. You're going to start to mitigate some stuff. And then finally, of course, you want to start to do some future proofing, reapplying your firewall rules, making sure that those are set up in a secure, in a safe way, or that they comply more with some of the different policies that you have there. But you're going to start to kind of think in terms of, okay, we've set these findings here, we found those. How do we make sure that we're secure from here? So we're going to talk, that's going to be the least that we're going to talk about today. But I just kind of wanted to put it there as just kind of additional stuff that you could always be doing to kind of enhance your security even more. So to begin here, we have taking an asset inventory. And one of the things that I do want to kind of showcase here is, and this was something that, so last year we took part in the CyberForce competition. The Department of Energy puts this competition on every year. And one of the awesome things that they had all the teams do is that as part of the competition, they have them put together a security document. And as part of that security document, you are tasked with identifying vulnerabilities. You have to discuss what different what assets are in your environment. So it's a really great way to start to kind of get into those different I don't know I'm just kind of struggling for a word here, but good procedures as you're kind of doing this. So for instance, if I go ahead and pull up what we put together for that competition, and of course now I'm on a different setup, so it's a little bit different for me. But if I go ahead and pull that open, this is an example of what maybe you might need to do. So another example would be as part of the Collegiate Cyber Defense competition, one of the first things they have you do is you have to do these injects or these little written challenges regarding your security configuration. Maybe they ask you to set different things up. But one of the very first ones that they're going to ask you to do is go ahead and take an asset inventory. What are your services that are running on each of the computers? What are your firewall policies? Blah, blah, blah. And you're going to want to have those all well documented and set up. So for instance, here, one of the things they had us do was, at least for CyberForce, was, okay, what is the system? What are we actually working with? What are your users going to be interacting with? What are each of the machines? So for instance, we had a Windows Active Directory server here. Here's the IP address for it. Here are the different ports and services you need for it. So it's a great thing that you want to go ahead and mark down, understand, okay, what exactly do we need here? And as part of that, you may actually even want to set up a network diagram. So maybe you want to visualize, okay, how is everything intercommunicated? And that can be a really great way of getting a better understanding of, hey, what is needed? What needs to communicate with each other. So if you really want to, you could add some different firewall rules to specifically specify a source and destination. It's not always the best security, but it could be an option for you depending on kind of how that information flow works within your network. So it's always, of course, an option there. And then lastly, we have these vulnerabilities. So it's not necessarily as part of that asset inventory, but it's also a good thing that you want to keep track of, understand, okay, what could potentially happen here, and what are you going to do to then harden from there on out. So that's just as a sample of just of some documentation that you may want to put together as part of either some sort of business operations or as part of, so for instance, as part of a competition. So this was from CyberForce. We have some stuff from CCDC as well that they always ask you to do depending on kind of what stage you're in. at least in terms of how you go ahead and do that. I've only got one slide for this, so we're actually going to jump into the machine in a second here, and we're going to kind of poke around and see what's going on. But for instance, you might want to check out the etc password and etc shadow files. You want to take a look at, okay, what users are on each of these machines? Who has access to what within the environment? How many users are there? Who are they? What are their functions? What groups are they a part of? So we'll take a look at that in a second. We may look at what the listening ports are, and we took a look at that last week when we were doing some stuff with the firewall rules, where we said, okay, we went ahead and applied our firewalls. And before we set up the firewall, we went ahead and ran our netstat. We took a look at what was listening on those machines. And then after we were done with the firewalls, even though from the exterior perspective, it reduced the attack surface, they're still listening there. So when we run that netstat command again, or that ss command again, it's all still there. It's still running. It's all still active. So you want to go ahead and you want to understand, okay, what am I dealing with there, at least in terms of those listening ports, what's going on there. And then lastly, one thing that I would also recommend is taking a looking at your services. So this can be a little bit tricky, and you'll kind of see why in a second here when we actually run systemctl to list out all the services. I believe there are a few different flags that you could put there to then go ahead and limit it down to either stuff that's just running or stuff that's just enabled on startup. But there's a lot there. And so as you kind of work through, as you get more familiar with different Linux operating systems and what they look like at base, you're going to get a better understanding of, okay, what is a normal systemctl? What does the output normally look like? Is there stuff that I want to be comparing it to as well? So if I go ahead and pull up the environment, and today, we're primarily just going to be looking at the workstation, the Ubuntu workstation. I personally, I like Ubuntu the most. For me, it's the most intuitive for moving around, at least in terms of how everything is kind of laid out here and where everything is at. So I personally use Ubuntu, or I like Ubuntu the most. But of course, you could do all of this on CentOS or Debian as well. Those work as well, and of course with all the other different Linux distributions that are floating out there. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out my screen here just to go ahead and clean it up. And as I mentioned, one of the first things that we may want to do is we may want to check out the users in the groups. Now, of course, you can always check if I go to /home. So this is the home directions for home directories for everybody. And you could see, okay, you get an idea in terms of, okay, what users are on this machine. We see we have an administrator user here, and we have a David user on here. Of course, you could always just skip setting up the home directory. So if I'm trying to be sneaky, you could just create a user, don't have them create a home directory for that user. And so you wouldn't see that here, but this is just a quick way if you want to see, okay, maybe these are users that are normally operating on the machine. So my assumption, if I was taking a look at this here as an operator, would be, okay, we have an administrator account on here, and then we have some sort of user David. So that would be what I would be expecting there. I could then further dive into there. So I could jump into the David account. I believe here we have a file share folder that we created to kind of host some different folders as part of the FTP server there. You'll see something like, as you may see, you may have the I spelled that wrong. So move documents to documents. Just to kind of make that a little bit more familiar with what we work with, but you may fill that out. You may have a documents, desktop, pictures, kind of what you see on a normal either Windows or in a GUI based Ubuntu desktop version rather than a server version. But at least in order to get a confirmed idea in terms of how many actual users are on here, we can go ahead and take a look at the etc password. So this is actually going to be the full list of users. Some of these are actually generated and are associated with different services and processes on the machine. And so you see a lot here. So we created only the administrator and the David account, but here we see all these other ones. And some of them kind of look a little bit familiar with some of the other stuff that we did. So for instance, there is an FTP user. There is a MySQL user. There's an SSHD user. There's all sorts of other stuff here. There's a TCP dump user. There's a message bus, systemd. There is a NATS. There's www data. The www data is associated with the web server that we go ahead and do. And so we kind of see there's a mail, apparently, there's news. So a lot of these are built in. And so as you kind of get more familiar with different Linux operating systems, and I always recommend, if you want to get more understanding, go ahead and just set up your own installation of Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, whatever flavor that you happen to be working with, and get a good idea in terms of, okay, at base, I've done absolutely nothing to the system. I haven't installed anything. I haven't set anything up. What does it normally look like? Of course, there's other things that you may see in, like, for instance, a competition setting where they may do some funny business. So, like, for instance, and I'll kind of highlight it here, and I'm going to go ahead and pull open my little highlighter red pen here so that it's a little bit easier to see. There we go, my spotlight here. But if we go ahead and take a look here, so if we go ahead and take a look at these, at least in terms of how to read this. So first we have the username. Then we have this X here. And this X is related to the etc shadow file. And what that is, apparently I'm trying to start up a text box for some reason. But at the very least, we have this user, we have this X here. Now, back in the day, this actually used to have the hash of the user's password there. Eventually, they found that, hey, maybe that's not the best idea, and they went ahead and threw it in etc/shadow. So this is actually the hashes of all of the different users on the account. You want to make sure that that's protected. We'll talk about this later when we're looking at misconfigurations. But if you're able to read the etc shadow file as a non-root user, that's a big deal. That's pretty dangerous. So if somebody were able to compromise and gain a hold of, let's say the administrator account is able to read etc shadow, you could then see what the hash of David's password is. You wouldn't get David's password right off the bat, but at the very least, you'd be able to see, okay, I see what it is, and then I can try and crack it offline. So that's something that you could do as an attacker. So I'll go ahead, I'm going to clear this out. We'll just go ahead and look at that etc password again. I'll continue down the line. So the first one here again is the username. Then we have, is there a hash in the etc shadow file? I don't remember I believe that this next number here is the user ID. Typically, what ends up happening is that the users are generated after 1,000. So if I go ahead and look at administrator was the first account that I created on here, and it has a UID of 1,000. David was the second that I created here, and it has an ID of 1,001. So a pretty natural progression there. Whereas all these other service ones, they typically appear at lower numbers. So we see sys is at 3, games is at 5, proxies at 13, WW data is at 33. We see all these other ones here. And so you can kind of just get a general idea. I don't remember, I believe you may be able to adjust that UID. I forget what the commands would be. Of course, you could always just change it in etc password, which I don't necessarily recommend, but you could do it there. The next number here, so we see 1,000, and 1,000 is the group ID. I believe that this next one, I forget what this one is, but here we have the home directory and then the type of shell that they log in as. So as you can see here, this administrator, if I were to log in as this administrator, so if I do SU or switch user to administrator, go ahead and pop on over him, it's the same bash shell. So we expect that. But if I were to switch over to David, and in this case, he also has bin bash. So if I switch over to David, he just has bin bash. If I were to change this, I don't remember what let me just check with the command real quick, because I want to make sure that we do this the proper way. I think you could also edit etc password to get this to change, but I don't want to do that here. I want to make sure that I do this the proper way. Give me 1 sec to go ahead and take a look at this, how to change your cell. Okay, so the command is chsh. The username that I want to change is David, and I'm going to go ahead and change it to sh. CSS. Oh, give me 1 sec. Give me 1 sec. Okay, here we go. So we're going to spell that slightly wrong. We're going to change it to bin sh, and we're going to do that for David. So if I were to go ahead and switch over to David, we note that we only have this $sign down here. So that would be an sh shell. And I could, of course, change this back. So if I go ahead and change it back to bin bash, we can do that here. So we have our full bash shell again. And you want to pay attention to these. I believe if I open up etc shells, this will list the valid shells. So you want to make sure that something like no login is not part of that etc shells. Because that may allow somebody to then go ahead and log in when they're not supposed to. And as you can see, if I go ahead and pull up password, all of these other guys are set to no login. So root in this case is set to bin bash. Sometimes you may see that as no login because we don't want people to be able to log in locally to root. You'll use sudo as an administrator account in order to achieve the same effect. But you'll see here games is set to no login. SSHD is set to no login. There's some that are set to false. So those are pretty equivalent. So you want to make sure that no login doesn't show in there. I believe for group, etc group, this will list you all of the different groups that are here. I don't remember exactly how to add people to different groups here, so I apologize for that. But at the very least, in here, it looks like when I installed a few things, it associated with them with that administrator account. But you can go ahead and read through these and make sure that there's nothing crazy going. In order to remove stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and head back to my root directory. We'll go ahead and create a new user real quick here. So we'll go ahead and add user. We'll just create a temp. We'll just be temp, add user temp. I'm not going to give him a password. Actually, okay, I'll just do 1, 2, 3. We'll just keep going here. Information is correct. If I were to go ahead and check etc password, I could use tail. So tail of etc password. We'll see temp there. I can always switch over to temp. And there I am, logged in as the temp user. If there's something that obviously doesn't fit within what you're expecting in terms of those users, depending on the competition, of course, if you are working in like a work environment, you'll get an understanding of either from your network administrators or in some cases kind of working with HR or other different departments to kind of ascertain what users are supposed to have access to different machines. So you'll want to kind of keep a running tally of that to make sure that people can't log into different ones that they're maybe aren't supposed to. So in this case, we know that, okay, there's this temp user out here. We don't need this temp user. So you just use user del and we'll just get rid of temp. And if I run, oh, obviously it doesn't exist, but if I go ahead and look at the end of etc password, it's gone. And so that's how you do that. We've always seen, of course, like something in a competition, there's somebody, they always create some sort of red team user and they get in there. So you always want to pay attention to that. Pay attention to the type of login that they have. Make sure that etc shells doesn't have any kind of funny business there. In a competition setting, of course, I would spin up like an Ubuntu machine on the side and to be like, okay, what does etc shells look like in a traditional sense? And you would go there. They could, of course, do further crazy stuff and actually modify these files to do stuff that maybe you don't expect them to. So just be mindful of that, but it's not as common and it's not something that I would necessarily expect right off. So those are our users messing around with etc password and etc shadow. One thing that I've done, and so for instance, as part of the CyberForce competition, if I were to pull up the document that I showed earlier, so if I pull this guy up again, one of the things that I at least did, or we did as part of preparations for this, is what we went ahead and did, and you'll kind of see it down here. But what we went ahead and did, and if I can find it, no applied password, password and user description, and that's more in terms of an Active Directory case. But here we go. We have weak passwords. So what we went ahead and did was we went ahead and pulled open the etc password and etc shadow files. We combined them together and we ran them through Hashcat or John the Ripper. And we went ahead and identified which of these has a weak password that we need to be careful of, and either let the user know that, hey, your password's really weak. It's been found in a known data breach. I don't know what the rules and regulations are if you are at a company, but at least in terms of a competition perspective, that's something that you may do. I forget which one we used it on. Maybe it was user add or it was add user. I forget which machine it was on, but they do actually have built-in tools that check it against a dictionary of really simple passwords. So it's not uncommon on different operating systems and different OSs to already have something built in like that check to make sure that, okay, hey, you're not using something that's too terribly weak when you're setting up your system. So that's just as an example there. So after users, then what I would recommend doing is checking out netstat. So you saw me use this command quite a few times. I don't remember if it's installed right now. It is installed, great. So if I use netstat, at least in terms of the flags, I use ANTLUP. You can, of course, you can change it. I think John Ford uses Plunt A. Generally speaking, what we're mainly looking for here is we're looking for making sure that we're taking a look at all TCP, all UDP. I forget exactly what the other flags exactly specify there, but this is going to tell us what different ports are currently listening on the machine. So for instance, we have 127.0.53. This is, I believe, the system trying to do some DNS resolving on itself. And that's generally speaking not too dangerous. And we went ahead and we filtered that with the firewall. We have 22 here. We have SSH. We have 33.0.60. Apparently, MySQL is running on both 33.0.60 and 33.0.6. Then we have 21 for our FTP server, 22 shows up again, and then 80 for a website. So we have those there. We would take a note of it. We would compare it. We would have put together some sort of document being like, okay, hey, here's what we're supposed to have here, and you would know that. I believe SS is the same. Font A, and it does a very similar one. In this case, it actually gives you more information than netstat. So I kind of like, I may begin using this even more nowadays. So we see quite a bit of additional information here. We see the user that it's associated with. We see the process ID. And so I think that's actually really cool. I don't use SS as much because mostly we've been using netstat, but that may be something that I may add more to my repertoire. So that's really cool there. Additionally, we can take a look at services that are running on here. And I just ran systemctl. So if you remember from, last week, here we go. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and make this bigger. Okay, so I just ran systemctl. I'll make this at the top of the machine. So I'll clear. So I'll do systemctl. This is every service, every process, not every process, but every service that is run by systemd on the machine. You can tell there's a lot that we have to get through here. So a lot of this is just kind of over time, you're going to get a better feel in terms of what's supposed to be on here. This is like really deep in the weeds here. This is like super far down here. So you've gone ahead and you've done users, you've looked at processes. I'm sure there's easier ways to look this up as well. This is just one thing that's just one option that's available to us. But you may want to take a look in here. Maybe there's some stuff that isn't supposed to be on here. But at least for Linux, this is one thing that you may be able to do. So we see quite a bit here. So if I keep going through, we'll see, again, a lot of this is going to be the same. I don't remember if there's a good, I'll have to find it. Maybe there's a good, there should be a good program or something where you can take two files. So for instance, I would take the systemctl of a clean Linux installation, and I would then do a systemctl of the one that we were targeting here, and I would just filter out all of them that are combined. If they're the same on both of them, filter those out. We know that generally speaking, those are going to be safe. An adversary, in theory, could modify that service and then do something crazy with it. But at the very least, to get you started, to get an idea of what's going on here, that would be a good place to start in my recommendation. So we can start to kind of scroll through here. Snap, sys, systemd, that's pretty normal. We run into Apache 2, so we now know, okay, Apache 2 is on here somewhere. Of course, again, this is a little bit more difficult. Apparently, there's something that failed, so we could, just out of curiosity, find out what more is about that. LVM2, MySQL is there. SSH is there, and you'd just be looking around and finding different things. We were in as part of a one of the other competitions that we do is the Hivestorm competition. That is generally designed specifically to harden both Linux and Windows machines. And one of the things that we had to do was actually John the Ripper was installed on there. I believe actually, no, that would be apt. So that would not be the systemctl, but you can get an idea in terms of, and actually there was only 195 units. So it actually wasn't too long. But you'd want to kind of get an idea of kind of what you're looking at. So that's just generally speaking where I would start. You could do other fun stuff with other different automated software to find different things you can look up. So if I do apt, and this is a little bit later in the presentation today, so I actually had to pull this up in a second here. But we could also take a look at what was installed with apt, or in some cases yum. I only put the instructions for how to set up with apt, so I'd have to look it up in terms of what you would do with something like yum. But at the very least, you could do some stuff with apt. So you can say apt. So I'll clear this again. So clear apt list -- installed rep, and then in this case, let's say Apache 2. So we see Apache 2, we see everything that's associated with it, but we can also get a full list of all installed packages. So now we get all of them. So you can take your time, take a look at, again, what is normal? What do we normally see on a clean Ubuntu system or a clean Debian or a clean Cent system? So that's just some options that you may have, at least in terms of taking your asset inventory from that perspective. All right. So after that, then you want to go ahead and you want to identify known vulnerabilities. So like I said earlier, one thing that of course you could do is you could conduct your, and I'll go back to the previous one in a second, but you could of course conduct your own penetration test. So you can take some of the tools and techniques that we talked about last week in terms of the red teaming, and if you want to, you can go ahead and conduct your own penetration test, or you can contract something out. So you can find there's all sorts nowadays. There's several companies that you could then work with them, and they will come in and they will conduct a penetration test. It's always great to kind of get a third eye view. Of course, there's always going to be a risk, at least in terms of exposure, exposing some of your internal systems to some third parties. But of course, you want to work with somebody who is well respected. They have a name in the industry. They've done this for quite a while. That you can check in with their references, make sure that everything is above board there. But you always want to do some sort of penetration test to kind of get a better idea of, okay, how is this vulnerable? What could a red teamer or what could an adversary go ahead and do in order to gain further access to these machines, either gaining access initially or doing some more damage from further on? At least in terms of a competition. So that would be if you're in like a general, if you're in a workforce environment, this is always a good step that you could of course do. But in competitions, time is limited in some cases. Sometimes they don't always give you access to the stuff ahead of time. So it's of course difficult for you to go ahead and do that from there. But at the very least, so for collegiate cyber defense competition and then Cyberforce, they give you time to go ahead and take a look at the environment ahead of time. So you can go ahead and conduct a penetration test, understand what are the weaknesses here before you actually deal with it. Alternatively, you could always do something like a vulnerability assessment. So this is just with a penetration test, you're checking all the locks, you're actually walking into the building, whereas with a vulnerability scan, you're just taking a look at what's there. So whether it's something that's noted out there in the wild, but there are two popular open, and they're not open source, but they're free. There's a free version of Nessus. I believe OpenVAS is open source. I don't quite remember, but they both have free versions that you can go ahead and use. And they basically have a whole bunch of different signatures or different vulnerable services that are out there. I'll actually pull up one of the reports that we got from them previously. But both of them can be run to identify different vulnerabilities that are on a device. They'll check version numbers. They'll check configurations in some cases to make sure that, hey, maybe there's something that's weak here that we could, of course, exploit, or different things here. So I'll go ahead and pull up one of our Nessus ones. With Nessus, it's made by Tenable. And so this is just something from Nessus essentially. So this is a free trial that we had. There are paid versions. So depending on kind of what your company does, you may have access to an enterprise version or some other different fun tools. I believe there's an entire sales thing where you can just buy different plugins depending on what different services and applications you have at your company. So they've really done a lot of really good work there. These aren't always the end all be all. These are a great first step. So you can go ahead, do your vulnerability scan, take a look at, okay, what is just the easy low grab stuff, and what would you do from there? I always recommend, even if you get a whole bunch of stuff here, go ahead and investigate it further. Sometimes there's false alarms or there's different things. You always want to cut down on those, but sometimes there's just something that is vulnerable in a very, 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 very specific instance. So maybe there's some crazy set of circumstances that need to happen in order for that exploit to be exploited. So you always want to kind of be careful there. But here's just a sample. So in this case, it's just against one machine. With the tool, you're able to actually, there's a lot of really cool stuff. You can give it an entire subnet to go ahead and check out. Or in this case, we just wanted to do it against an individual host. Another really cool thing that you could do is you can actually provide it with some credentials. And it'll go ahead and it'll log in and it'll do some stuff internally as well. So I thought that was really cool. Get yourself some additional insight as what's going on here. So here we get just a general overview. It's going to go ahead and assign different vulnerability scores to each of everything. I forget exactly what they use CVSS, and that's just a general standardized score aggregator or score that they use out there. There's different reasons as to why something may be given a critical rating versus just an informational rating. So you always kind of want to work through your stuff one by one. But here, so for instance, we had an NFS share disclosure. In this case, if I remember, it actually dropped you directly into the etc directory, and then you can actually look at other stuff as well. So it's actually a really dangerous setup here. Then we had some other stuff that were world readable. We had some SNMP stuff, so simple network management protocols, some different stuff there. And then of course they get into some lower level stuff. So they do operating system identification. So some stuff that could be used. So of course, if they find out what the operating system version is, they find out different important parts of the system, you can start to kind of piece together different vulnerabilities there. So that's why they include it in these, so that you're just aware of it. Hey, is there some way in which you can kind of prevent this from happening, or prevent this from being exposed? In this case, since I'm not using their web portal, I just have the general overview here. So unfortunately, I can't really go too much further in depth in terms of what it gave you here, but it provides a little bit additional information when you log in here. And actually, I'm going to very quickly here, I don't know, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I'm actually going to see if I actually have access to that anymore. Give me one sec. I will quickly turn this on, and I will come back to this in a few minutes, kind of depending on how long this takes to get started up. But I'll double check to see if I can log in, and we can actually take a look at the full report. When you export just the PDF version, it doesn't give you the full detailed breakdown of everything. It just kind of gives you the high level overview. As you can see here, there's these plugin numbers, and so you can then use that, of course, to look more. And these are all configurable to kind of depending on how many plugins that you own. So that's just as a note there. We had some additional information here that we were able to then use to further find out, okay, where should we be looking? What are some just things that pop right out at you when you're doing either a penetration test or you're doing some different tests from there. So I can't, they're not always, again, there's always false positives, but in many cases, they're a good first step to get you started. Alrighty. Alrighty, and then next we have identifying misconfigurations. I kind of use this as sort of just kind of a catch-all here. But generally speaking, you're just kind of looking around in the machines. Are there different areas that you may want to look at? These are the ones that I recommend taking a look at. So for instance, I recommend, especially if you're a beginner at this, you don't really, if you haven't really done this that often, is I recommend checking out Hacktricks. They have an entire Linux privilege escalation. I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the chat here if anybody wants to go ahead and follow along here if they want to pull this out. And I don't know, we'll see if I include this in the YouTube comment. But if I go ahead and pull this down, this is, and they also have one for Windows too. And so John Ford and he recommended this site to me. And I find it really, really good to get you started, especially in like a penetration testing field. But they'll kind of walk you through, okay, if I gain access to a machine, if I gain a shell, what are different things that I could use so they can gain further privilege escalation? So here's some things that you may want to start out for. So first they'll say, okay, go ahead and just find out, okay, operating system, what is the path? Are there any environment variables? Nowadays, I mentioned earlier in the session, I was like, okay, cloud is starting to really kind of take off. It has taken off. And a lot of companies use it pretty extensively for their infrastructure. But sometimes the environment variables can hold cloud keys or different ways or authentication tokens or things like that you may want to use. So you could just get those right there from an environment variable. Are there different kernel exploits? Maybe the sudo version is vulnerable. That'd be an older system. Is there other enumeration that you can do? You can, of course, use a tool like LinPeas. This is more geared towards, this site here is geared definitely more towards the manual method of step-by-step going ahead and doing your own investigation and finding this stuff out. But of course, we have LinPeas here. LinPeas is awesome. It's actually the Linux privilege escalation awesome script. And this does a lot of this automatically. So I don't know, we'll see if we can see here real quick. There's a quick video here of just kind of them running it, and we can kind of see exactly what's going on here. So if I go ahead and see, they're gonna actually run LinPeas. They have the lovely little P guy up here, And then they just do a lot of this system information. So they'll find out what is the operating system, what is the pseudo version, what's the path, the environment variables, and you can kind of see it popping up right here as part of the output here. And you can kind of keep going. So a lot of the stuff that I'll be kind of doing here is actually going to be mirrored. It would be mirrored in LinPeas. So you could of course do that. And this is of course a great way to start too for these different competition setups too. We did it for CyberForce. We went ahead, we pulled in LinPeas. For Windows, they have one called WinPeas that you can use. So we went ahead and we downloaded both of those and we executed both of those in there. I don't believe it actually runs any exploits or anything like that. So it's generally pretty safe. You want to clean up, of course, after you're done, so that if somebody were to get on, they wouldn't just have that automatically on the machine. So that could be something that you want to be careful with. But you can see, of course, as that output comes in there. So LinPeas is excellent. But we have system information. There's different installed software. Is there vulnerable software that you can use? So pulling up that app list, pulling up that yum list, pulling up all that stuff there. And we'll come back to that in a sec. But at least in terms of kind of from a competition point of view, if you're doing this as part of like either work or something like that, and you've been tasked with doing this sort of hardening thing, you may as well just kind of go through the entire list. But from what I would say, if you're on a competition, you're crunched for time, you don't have much options, I would just focus on these things. I would look at your scheduled tasks and your cron jobs. So things that are scheduled to run at a certain time, I recommend taking there. I would look at sudo and suid commands. So you want to check to see, okay, what are the permissions for every user if they were to run sudo? And then we can add what's known as an SUID bit or an SGID bit. And what that essentially does is it allows us to run the program with the permissions of the owner. And so if the program was written by root, it will be run by root. So are there different ways in which we could use that to get access to certain other fun stuff? Interesting files. So so for instance, we'll come back around to our etc password or etc shadow file. If we're able to edit etc password or if we're able to read etc shadow, that has pretty important implications throughout everything as well. So and actually before I go, actually we'll cover that at the end. We'll take a look at that Nessus report at the very end. So I don't want to take too much time. So if I go ahead and start out, one thing that I would recommend again would be your scheduled tasks and cron job. So in this case, there's actually not going to be, and we'll actually kind of set this up manually on our end. So if we go ahead and do cron tab -L, and this will depend on the user. So in this case, the root has no cron jobs. If I switch over to administrator, cron tab, he has no cron jobs. And of course, with my last guy here, with David, he also doesn't. So if I do cron tab -L, David doesn't have any cron jobs. So in this case, we would actually go in and actually modify it. Let me go ahead and pull up the cron job. Give me one sec, folks. How is that up? Give me one sec. So if I were to run, and I'm actually going to jump into David here. So I'll run into David. Actually, you know what? We'll do this as root. Or no, we'll do it as administrator. Administrator has a few different abilities here. We'll do it as administrator. Okay, I'm actually in root here, so I'm going to clear out. And we're going to go ahead and run cron tab -E. So in this case, it's going to ask you what editor you want to use. I think that's really cool. In this case, we'll just use nano. And we can go ahead and see our cron jobs. And so right now, clearly, there's nothing here, but they give us a sample here. So if we were to use, if we want this to run at 5 a.m. every week, you would set it up like this. So I forget what the 0, but the second one is the time. And then in this case, they are making a backup of something. So they're running the tar command and they're making a backup of apparently of the home directory, and they're throwing it in /backup. So we could add a new one. If I do if I do all stars, I believe it will run every minute. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It will run every minute. And then let's say echo hello into the file home/administrator/hello.txt. So we can go ahead and write that out, and we can go ahead and wait. Oh, yeah, I'm in home/administrator. We can go ahead and wait. I'll come back to it and we'll go ahead and see if it if it doesn't. But if I do cron tab -L, now we see that that's there. I could do cat etc/cron star, and I could view the cron jobs for everybody. So it appears as if the system has some cron jobs that it runs pretty regularly. There's apparently something that runs daily, weekly, and monthly that it's going to go ahead and do. I believe this is related to fetching updates. So fetching, making sure that different software is being updated on a regularly basis. You could, of course, do stuff with, whatchamacallit, with, I don't know where I was going there. But here we go. So we can always do cat etc/cron star. I believe it's better if you look at it from from the root point of view. So this could be somewhere that you could look for this. I believe there's another location that cron jobs are stored. So let me look that up real quick. Cron job location for users. And you want to check this out as well. So we'll go ahead and take a look at here. And it is stored in var/spool/cron. So if I go to cd var/spool, cd cron, and then in this case, cron tabs. And in this case, we see the administrator. So if we see here, we see that cron job that we set up there. And you want to check that out because each user may have a different one that they may be using as well. So if I go to home/administrator, let's see, and that hello.txt did end up showing up here. So we get hello. We can, of course, change these things into like scripts that we can run. So for instance, if I go ahead and do cron tab -E, and I go ahead and run a specific file every minute. So if I do *****, and I want to do, let's say, startup, minute.sh, we could run this command. In this case, I'm actually going to have the full path. So home/administrator /minute. Of course, I have to create this file. So in this case, I'm actually going to, we'll go ahead and make this. So we'll do nano minute.sh. So we'll go ahead and say, I don't know, echo, this is a test as well, into home/administrator/test.txt. So I know that that's not too mind-blowing, but here, and I'll actually have to double check. We want to make sure that this can be executed. So we're going to do minute.sh. Go ahead and take a look at that. So we actually ls-l. Oops. And then that'll be executed at some point as well. So that's just an option that we can, of course, have there from our cron job. So that's how you would go ahead and you would check. You would check etc/cron star, or you do cron tab -L. And if you have root, you should be able to access var/ I believe it was cron/spool. So we can go ahead and exit, and we can take a look at what we were looking at. So let's see. var/spool/cron/cron job and cron tabs, and you'll be able to see the cron tabs for everyone. And there we go. So that it went ahead and it executed minute.sh, and it executed it as test.txt. So that's just an option that we have there that we could go ahead and use. So that's where we would view it. Things that you want to take a look out for. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this could be exploited. So if I take a look at, so if I clear this, if I go ahead and take a look at that cron job again, so if I go var spool cron tabs/administrator, go ahead and take a look at this again. There's a few different things that you might want to take a look at. I don't know if this will show, and actually I'm going to jump back into administrator again, cron tab -E, and I want to check to see if it actually shows the path. So in this case, it doesn't show the path. So if I go ahead and exit back out, and I look at etc/cron star, in this case, I don't remember what, let's see, let's go ahead and take a look at etc/cron/cron/d. cron/d. Let's see. We'll find it real quick. There we go. So if we take a look at this cron tab, so the thing that I'm looking at here is etc/cron or etc/ actually what directory am I in? I'm in etc. So if I cat etc/cron tab, we see a path here. And if I were to edit this cron tab, so if I do, and you don't want to do this, but this is just as a sample here, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. So if I were to edit my cron tab, and actually let me look at what does it look like with the root. So that's not what we want. But if I go ahead and look at cron tab, if I go ahead and edit it, we see this path here. So if there's a command, so let's say we go ahead and add one. So star, 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 star. We want to go ahead and give the username. So in this case, we want it to be run as root. And we want to run, let's say, minute.sh, right? So let's say we have minute.sh. What we wanted this to do was we wanted this to run an home/administrator/minute.sh, right? That would, let's say that's the intended path that we wanted here. Well, let's say that we made this a little bit simpler and we said minute.sh. And we go ahead and add to our path, and you wouldn't want this to happen, but let's say that we want to add into our path home/administrator, home/administrator. Go ahead and add that. What's going to happen is when the cron job is happening, when it goes ahead and runs, it's going to go ahead. It sees that that we didn't give an absolute path. We gave a relative path. So it's going to go ahead and it's go down the line. It's going to say user local minute.sh, user local bin user minute.sh, bin minute.sh, user sbin minute.sh. It's eventually going to hit home administrator minute. And actually I have to add oh, no, I don't. Minute.sh. Eventually it's going to find that. Now, if any of these paths could be writable, so let's say that we wrote to it and we had this minute.sh and we're going to go ahead and run it. If we were able to edit the files in any of these paths, we can go ahead and add our own file called minute.sh and it would run that instead. So if I go ahead and take a note here, if I go to user local bin minute.sh, so if I go ahead and exit out, so we go ahead and exit, we'll go to home administrator. I'm going to get rid of the, let's go over to administrator real quick. SU administrator. Oops. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of we're going to go ahead and get rid of this guy here. We're going to go ahead and comment him out. Oh, give me a minute. No. We're going to go ahead and delete this. So we're just going to go ahead and delete him. We're going to go ahead and exit back out, and we're going to go ahead and remove test. So we'll go ahead and give that a second to go ahead and run. So we'll see it. Well, in a minute, we'll see test.txt pop back up again because it was run as root. There he is. So in this case, we see that we eliminated the administrator's cron tab, but as the system, it's going to go ahead and run that again anyway. And it still says the test is running well. If I were to look at the ls-l, you'll see that this is now written by root. So instead of being written by administrator, I didn't show that earlier, but because it was being run by administrator, it's going to go ahead and show that. We can see that there. So that's kind of curious. And that's kind of what we want to kind of be careful of here. So if I do cat minute.sh, this is a test as well. So if, and we can see here that I'm able to actually write it. So we'll get to that in a minute. But if I go ahead and cat my etc cron tab. So if I go ahead and open this up, we see that we're running this. If I go ahead and find, let's say user local sbin. So if I go ahead and create a new file, user local sbin minute.sh. We're going to go ahead and this is just going to be a separate echo. Haha, I have used the relative path. path against you. And we're going to go ahead and throw that in home administrator slash path.txt. So we'll go ahead and create that. We want to make sure that that is writable or executable. So I don't remember what, so let's do chmod plus x. So we'll go ahead and wait a minute, and in a minute, it'll actually show up as path.txt, and we can show that, hey, you want to make sure that if I take a look here, that these paths, you can't, and you can actually prevent this. So if I were to rewrite this minute.sh, and if I gave the absolute path, so if I said home/administrator/minute.sh, you wouldn't be able to execute this attack. You would be only able to do it if you gave relative paths in here in this minute.sh. So if I go ahead and do ls, we see that path.txt was created. And I can use this in a variety of different ways. So let's say that I do go ahead and I edit this to be the absolute path, right? So if I go ahead and edit this to be the absolute path, so let's see, instead it is now home/administrator. So we'll go to the end here. Give me 1 sec here. So we'll say home/administrator/minute.sh. And we're actually going to remove path. We'll notice that that then disappears, or it disappears and it does not recreate it. But we'll note that as administrator, we're able to edit minute.sh. So the root account is running minute.sh. So we can also use this in an attack. So if I were to get rid of all this, and I want to give myself root, we're going to copy bin bash into, let's say, home/administrator/bash, or like let's call it shell or something like that. We'll call it shell, and then we'll go ahead and use we'll go ahead and set the SUID bit on it. We'll go ahead and add that on there. So we'll go ahead and see, and in a minute, it'll copy it as that root user. So you always want to be careful, making sure that anything that is in, and I may not be able to look at this, cat etc cron tab. I actually am able to look at this. So you always want to be careful if there's something that's being written or run by root, or for any user for that matter, any user that you don't want something to somebody to gain access to it, you want to make sure that those permissions are pretty locked down, that people who aren't able to edit it can't edit it. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to that. So if I were to go ahead and see, I believe it's, let's see, let me double check the exact command. As you can see, I see this shell here that was created by, and if I look at who wrote it, it is written by root. So that could be dangerous. So we'll go ahead and see this in a second here. Let me just double check what command I actually have to write here. Give me 1 sec to execute it. I believe it's -p. So give me 1 second here. Let's see. Shell -p. So as you can see here, we're in shell. And if I do a QAMI real quick, we see that we are now root. So that's just as a sample there. I'm not going to go too in depth exactly how that copy worked, but all you need to know is that, hey, there was a cron job that root was running that was modifiable by somebody else, and so that could be abused for malicious purposes. So I just kind of wanted to highlight those as well. Next, we have SUID and sudo. And so we can check to see what sudo commands we're eligible for. If I do exit and I do sudo-l, we can see what commands I'm eligible for. In this case, I need to give a password, in this case, ABC123. So in this case, we see here, user may run the following commands. And we can say all, but in this case, in order to run sudo, we have to give it the password. And that's good. In theory, let's say that you were trying to be lazy and you said no password. So you could say, okay, sudo, and it goes ahead and lets you do it. That's very dangerous for obvious reasons. And so you want to make sure that that's not there. You use it exceptionally sparingly, because you could use those to kind of gain some either, maybe you'll run something. There was a setup that I had where I allowed sudo no password on cron, etc cron tab. You were able to actually set up your cron jobs, and you were able to actually do that without a password at all. So that could be very dangerous from there. So you want to make sure that you understand kind of what the sudo. Always check out etc sudoers. So exit cat etc/sudoers. etc doers. This tells you all of the different, it tells you what users are allowed to run sudo under certain restrictions. So as we can see here, anybody who is in admin has all. So in this case, you have to still provide a password, but you can run any command with sudo. You can list specific passwords that are allowed with sudo. So that could be something that you want to do. And like, for instance, in a competition perspective, they may add a whole bunch of crazy stuff in here. So that's just a sample there. To properly edit this, don't do like nano etc sudoers. Don't do that. Do vsudo. So you want to do vsudo, and you'll be able to edit this now properly with the proper settings. So that's just as a note there. Then we had suid bit. And so as you saw in a second ago, so if I take a look at this shell, if I open up minute.sh, I added a chmod plus s. So as I mentioned earlier, the suid bit, it allows you to run a command with the privileges of the owner. So in this case, we're running this as root. So that's a pretty dangerous thing. And there's actually a website. So it's GTFO bins. So I'm going to go ahead and go there, gtfobins.io. If you go ahead and check that out, that actually has a list, and it has there's two important categories I'd recommend taking a look at. Sudo. So if you're able to run the command as sudo, you could do different things with it. So if I'm able to run, let's say, there's a good one here. I like nano and vim are fun ones to get. So if I go ahead and find nano, so if I scroll right back up to the top here, and I can use this lovely search bar. So if I do nano, or let's say Vim. Vim is a little bit more consistent in my mind. And we can see here, Vim has a shell. So in this case, if I can run Vim with no password, so if I have sudo enabled, I could just go ahead and give myself a shell. So if I go ahead and pull this over to the side, I'll actually make a second copy here. So if I do DTF opens, go ahead and just make a second copy, Vim, go ahead and pull that open so I have it on the side here, so I don't have to keep moving this window back and over. So I'm going to go ahead and SU on over to administrator. And if I were to run sudo vim, and you just see bin bash or bin s, we do bin bash. And me now see that, hey, we're root now. Haha. I could then say, and then as you can see here, it actually opens up into Vim, which I think is kind of cute. But as you can see, we can use these commands to actually give ourselves higher privileges. If the suid bit is set, there's a different command that I need to run. In this case, it's very similar. But if I were to go, if I say exit and I do chmod plus s, I believe it's bin/vim, I think. Yep. And then I do su to administrator. And I actually have to give the full path here. So I can't just say vim. I have to say bin/vim. And I say vim-c py import os.exec l bin sh. And I'm pulling this directly off the site. So you would just kind of follow, you would look it up. There we go. Let's see, there's apparently something wrong in that execution there. So I would have to look around a little bit more. So actually, let me look for another command that might be a good one for our example here. Give me one sec. What would be a good one? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, what are some good ones that we've seen in the past that we've used. I like the Vim one's a fun one, like you saw with sudo. What's another good one? And of course I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there are actually, I have another sample here. So give me 1 second, folks, as I find it. Of course, it gets a little tricky. Here, I'll just pull over. So like, for instance, you could do stuff with systemctl. And they each kind of vary. So they kind of vary in terms of their difficulty for pulling off. And as you can see down here with this SUID bit one, you would give it, you would run vim, blah, blah, blah. You'd put that in apparently. This requires vim is compiled with Python support. So in this case, let's try that again. And let's try that with py3. So let's try this with py3. I don't know if this will work. We'll just give it a go. Oops, I spelled that wrong. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second. Make this full screen again. I will clear. And rather than E, it's going to be 3. So let's go ahead and see if this works. I'd be curious if it does. Detected some sort of error, some sort of invalid syntax. Oh, I see what's wrong. Okay, I see what's wrong. We will try this. I meant to do this. There we go. We'll run that. And there we go. And we have a shell now. So if I run who am I? I am now root. So I just ran this command here. I pulled this over. Oops. Then I pulled the command that's down here, and I just went ahead and executed it. So limited SUID versus SUID, and we saw it here, and we were able to get a shell. There's other things. If you've ever followed the TCM security, if you've done their not zero to hero, but their oh shoot, I can't remember, practical ethical hacking, I think. He mentions that there was something with Apache where it allows you to like read files or something like that. So if I go ahead and find it, sometimes you don't gain access to like a direct shell. Yeah, Apache 2CTL, so you can do file read. So it doesn't necessarily always give you access to a shell right off the bat, but you can use it for other nefarious things as well. So finally, then we have interesting files. So as I mentioned, etc password controls all of the different users that are on the system. If you have the ability to write to it, you can just add users. So in this case, it's not recommended to do it this way, but it's just for demonstration purposes. We can go ahead and actually modify it. So if I look at etc password, and I actually go ahead and edit etc password, we can go ahead and just edit it. So let's go ahead and take a look. I don't know if I may have to do a system restart, but let's say we could create a guy named bad guy. I forget what the, give me 1 sec. It's actually listed as part of hack tricks. So this could be a good sample of kind of how we can use hack tricks just real quick here. So if we go ahead and pull up hack tricks and we go ahead and take a look at their thing, we actually have to scroll all the way down here in a second here. And they'll give a sample of how to go ahead and insert this user here. So if I go ahead and actually let's do an etc password here. Let's see, there's only 11. So password, there we go. Give me a sec. Here we go. So here we go. Echo dummy, two colons, 0, 0, and then we can give him, I believe this is actually giving him into the root group. Or at least putting his home into root. So that could be dangerous. I don't know why this is not letting me exit. So give me 1 second here. There we go. Alrighty. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead and just create. It's not recommended if you're doing red teaming. I don't recommend doing it this way. There's actually a better way to do this with like creating the actual hash, because this could be used to actually gain access to the account. So if I was anybody else, this does not have a password. So bad guy, 2 colons. I'll create him at 1002. 1002. Actually, 0, 0 would be root. So if I do 0, 0, I can pretty much just set him as root. Root, bin bash. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if this works. SU bad guy. They say SU dash bad guy. Oh, and there we go. Actually, I logged in as root. So let's switch over to David. Oh yeah. Okay, there you go. And so in this case, because we set the UID to 0, it's just going to go ahead and give us root. So that would be the dangers of a modifiable etc password file. If I'm able to read shadow, I'm able to gather these hashes. And actually, I don't remember if you're able to write, that's even worse, because then you could then put whatever hash you want in there, and then you'd be able to gain access. So that could also be more dangerous. So that's just some examples of some interesting files that you might want to take a look at. And then finally, of course, we have mitigating filings. So you want to lock down any sort of, and we're actually going to keep going here. We don't have more than, there's probably no more than 10 or 15 minutes. We're just going to go ahead and finish things out. We're not going to take a break today. I apologize for that. But again, we'll go back over to ports. So if you found something that wasn't supposed to be listening, there's a few different things that you can do to make sure that no danger can happen. And I actually highly recommend, I'll have to find the link again, but John Ford created this port closing sheet. So he said, you start by taking a look at, you're either going to use netstat or SS to go ahead and take a look at what ports are listening. You're going to say, okay, are there any extra ports that are listening? If there are you given an ID? And if you are given an ID, you can start to kind of track down where that's from. So if it does give you an ID, sometimes if you're not, that could be controlled by the kernel. So you're limited in your options from that. So you're kind of limited only to apt in that case. But in this case, we have like systemctl. So we can go ahead and take a look at, okay, what is the status? If we are given, if it is being controlled by systemd, we can stop it and disable it. So I have in the slides here, you have a few options here. You can kill the process, and that'd be extremely temporary. Maybe there's a cron job that's going to go ahead and maybe systemd is regularly checking to see if there's something that's enabled. And what enabled essentially means is if you reboot the system upon startup, it'll start the service. And so it may just go ahead and re-kick it on. So killing the process is an extremely temporary option. You could then disable it, which is again temporary. So if it restarts, it'll start it up again. Or you could remove it. So you could use apt to delete it. So if I go ahead and I take a look at, I have two here that are not necessary. So if I clear netstat, pln2u, we see DNS, we're not going to do anything with that. SSH, we had MySQL, and we also had a website. So if I do systemctl status, and in this case, I could just do kill, and then let's say I want to kill the website. So 2554, and I do netstat again, it's gone. So that would be the super messy, it's gone. I've killed it, it's gone, don't worry about it. You don't want to do that, because then again, on reboot, it'll pop back up again. We can do systemctl status, and I can actually give the PIDs. So in this case, if we take a look at MySQLD, so 4525, and this would be used to make sure, like, to better understand what exactly is running it. So in this case, it is mysql.service. So if I don't know if systemctl stop mysqld, yeah, as you can see, you can't find it. So this would be to find the actual name. So you would say systemctl stop mysql, and then you would say, give it a sec. Sometimes it takes a while, and then you would disable it. And again, disabling prevents it from going on startup. So there we go. That's it's not permanent, because again, somebody could come in and just re-enable it and start it again, and that could be bad. There could be some sort of cron job that does that for it, or a red teamer could find it. So that's not always the best way. But as you can see here, it's gone now. So now we only have port 22 and 21, which were the two ports that we wanted at the beginning, only SSH and FTP. Or I can go ahead and I can just delete it. So, okay, well, we don't need MySQL on here. Let's go ahead and look at our services that are installed here, and we can go ahead and take a look from there. So if we go ahead and pull that up, we can go ahead and we can do apt list, list installed rep MySQL. We see MySQL client and MySQL server. In this case, let's just uninstall MySQL server. So apt purge MySQL server. And then you'll want to do apt auto remove. Apt auto remove is going to just get rid of the additional, I don't remember if purge, I remember the specifics, but you want to do both of those commands. You're going to go ahead and say yes, and it's going to go ahead and delete that from the system. So now if I were to try to do systemctl, we'll give it a sec to run and complete that command. Sometimes you have to do a reboot there to make sure that it actually does complete the removal. In this case, I think it'll be fine. So in this case, systemctl So systemctl status mysqld or mysql. And in this case, it is dead. It's masked. So again, I think in this case, we would actually have to reboot now, and then we'll see. Again, sometimes you have to restart it, but in this case, we would not be able to then start it again, or at least not so much. We may have to go in and look at that list again. We may have to do apps list installed and check to see, okay, maybe we have to uninstall something else related to that MySQL. So let's go ahead and take a look to make sure that that has been applied. So we'll go ahead and check that. We'll give it a sec to reboot here. And then the last thing that we'll do today was we'll take a look at that Nessus. I don't know, we'll see kind of in a second here to see if it is actually still there. I don't remember if maybe the license, the free license is gone. So we'll go ahead and take a look at our systemctl status MySQL. And it's masked. So if I was trying to do systemctl start MySQL, what the heck? Okay, give me a sec. Systemctl start MySQL, it would fail. So it can't find it, it's gone. So we don't have to worry about it. In this case, my other Kali Linux is not starting. I don't know what the reason for that is. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show you the full Nessus dashboard. So I apologize for that. It's just not working. So that's just we're not going to be able to take a look at that for today. So I do apologize for that. But that's all for today. That's all I have. Hopefully you got a good idea, at least in terms of some good starting steps. So I'll go back to the beginning here, at least some starting steps that you might want to do. So of course, you want to take an asset inventory. You want to get a good understanding of what's on the machine and what's going on there. You want to take a look at the software. You want to use something like Nessus or OpenVAS or contract out a penetration test to take a look at, hey, what are the vulnerabilities? You then want to go deep onto the machine and take a look at, okay, hey, are there any misconfigurations here? Are different root commands being running here as a cron job, and should we fix that? And then of course you're going to want to mitigate those to make sure those don't happen. So that's all for today. On Thursday, we're going to come back with incident response. So we're going to take a look at both how to identify when an attack is taking place, but also then go in and make sure that we can identify what's going on and then hopefully put a stop to it before it gets too bad. So that's going to be it for today, and I will catch up with everybody on Thursday.